There's something happening in her psychology right now, something she would never admit, possibly doesn't even fully understand herself, and it's being caused directly by how she's treating you. Most men who are in this situation spend their energy trying to figure out what to do next. Should they pull away? Should they reach out? Should they give her space or press for a conversation? And all of that strategizing, understandable as it is, misses the more important question entirely. The question isn't what you should do. The question is what is actually happening inside her when she places low value on you, and why the answer to that question is almost certainly not what you expect. Here's what I want you to hold on to through this entire video. There is something you've been doing or stopping yourself from doing that affects her far more deeply than anything she's letting you see. It's not dramatic. It doesn't involve ultimatums or disappearing acts. It's quieter than that. And the reason most men never discover it is because it looks from the outside like nothing at all. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what it is, not so you can use it against her, but so you stop accidentally protecting her from it. Before we talk about what hurts her, we need to understand what she's actually doing, because most men misread this completely, and that misreading is exactly what keeps them stuck. When a woman doesn't value a man, most people, including the man on the receiving end, assume what's happening is simple. She's not interested. She's moved on emotionally. Her behavior reflects her feelings, and her feelings are absence. But that's not quite right. What's actually operating beneath the surface is more structured than that, and structure matters here because structure has rules, and rules can be understood. What she is running most of the time without any conscious awareness is a hierarchy dynamic. Every person operates within social and emotional hierarchies. We track who matters, who is watching us, who we have influence over, who has influence over us. Women, particularly in the context of attraction and relationships, are often acutely attuned to their position within these invisible rankings. And a man who continues to engage with her while she treats him as a lower priority is, without realizing it, confirming a hierarchy she has placed him in. This is not manipulation on her part. Not usually. Most of the time, it's reflexive. Her behavior follows an internal logic that she couldn't articulate if you asked her directly. She knows she doesn't feel pulled toward you the way she once did, or the way she might with someone else. And that feeling of lesser pull translates into lesser investment, lesser care, and a casual indifference that can feel, on the receiving end, like a quiet kind of cruelty. But here's what matters. That structure, that hierarchy, only functions if you keep engaging with it on her terms. The moment your engagement changes in a specific way, the structure doesn't just shift. It loses something it was depending on, and she feels that loss before she can name it. Once you understand the architecture of how she's running this dynamic, the next question becomes more interesting. What is she actually getting from it, and what happens when that supply disappears? Here's the part that most men find uncomfortable when they first hear it, not because it's harsh, but because it's accurate. When a man continues to seek a woman's approval after she has already placed low value on him, through explanation, through persistence, through emotional availability that hasn't been earned back, he is providing her with something she values without requiring anything from her in return. Psychologists who study social dynamics call this unreciprocated validation supply. The plain language version is simpler. You are giving her the experience of being important to someone without her having to do the work of being worth it to you. And this matters more than most men realize because of what it does to attraction. There is a well-documented principle in relationship psychology when a person receives consistent regard without having invested equally in return. The natural psychological effect is not gratitude. It is lowered esteem for the source of that regard. Not because she is calculating or unkind, but because the human mind is wired to equate availability with abundance and to treat what is abundant as less valuable. You have probably felt this yourself in another context. Think of something you worked hard for compared to something that came without effort. The effort changes how you experience the thing you received. Her psychology is operating on the same mechanism, just applied to you. Now, you might be thinking, but I haven't been chasing her. I've been giving her space. And that may be true in terms of behavior, but there's a difference between physical distance and the internal stance you're holding toward her regard for you. Many men who stop texting are still emotionally waiting, still internally checking whether she noticed, still allowing her perception of them to function as a kind of gauge for their own worth. She can feel that. Not through telepathy, but through the microsignals that leak through every interaction, however infrequent. Which brings us to the real question, not what she's taking, but what actually registers as loss for her, because those are not the same thing. Most men assume that pulling away is what gets her attention, and sometimes it does briefly, but there's something that cuts deeper, and it has nothing to do with distance. When men think about what would hurt a woman who has undervalued them, they typically imagine the same few scenarios. She sees him with someone else. He stops responding. He moves on publicly. These are behavioral changes, and they can land, especially if she still has some residual investment. But they are surface-level disruptions. She can rationalize them. She can file them under pride or ego or him trying to make a point. What she cannot easily rationalize is something subtler. And this is the distinction that most conversations about this topic never reach. There is a difference between a man withdrawing his behavior and a man withdrawing his need for her to see him accurately. Those are two entirely different events. The first one she notices and categorizes. The second one she feels without being able to name it. And that unnameable quality is what makes it land differently in her nervous system. Behavioral researchers who study attachment and emotional regulation have observed a consistent pattern. When one person in a dynamic stops requiring the other person's validation in order to feel grounded, the person who was previously doing the undervaluing often experiences a form of psychological disorientation. Not necessarily pain in the way most people imagine pain, something closer to a sudden awareness that a background signal, one they didn't know they were tracking, has gone quiet. Think of it this way. If a light in a room has been on so long you've forgotten it's there, you don't notice the light. But the moment it goes off, you notice the dark. That is what genuine emotional detachment does, not performed detachment. Not strategic distance, genuine internal reorganization, where his sense of himself no longer requires her perception as a supporting structure. She feels the dark. But to understand why that shift hits her the way it does, you need to understand something about how women process their own emotional positioning. And this is where it gets genuinely interesting. She may not value you right now. That doesn't mean she stopped tracking you. This is the part that tends to surprise men most. And honestly, it surprises many women too when they examine it honestly. The assumption is that low interest means low attention. That if she's not invested in you, she's not paying attention to you. But that's not how human psychology actually works. And it is especially not how it works for women in the context of men they have any kind of emotional history with. Women and humans broadly run a continuous background process of social and emotional positioning. We are tracking our status within every significant relationship we're in, not obsessively, not consciously most of the time, but consistently. We are noting who regards us highly, who has withdrawn their regard, who we have moved in the hierarchy of, who has moved above us. This tracking system doesn't switch off when interest drops. It continues running as long as the person remains in any kind of proximity, physical, social, or even psychological. What this means practically is that a woman who has placed low value on a man is still, on some level, registering how he holds himself in relation to her. She is still, without intending to, tracking whether he seeks her approval, whether her opinions still land on him visibly, whether her indifference costs her anything in his eyes. Of course, this is not something she would admit to. Some women aren't even fully aware it's happening. But you may have witnessed the evidence of it yourself, The moment a woman who previously seemed completely indifferent suddenly becomes curious when a man stops seeming interested in her impression of him. That sudden curiosity didn't come from nowhere. It came from a tracking system that registered a change. Now you might ask, if she's tracking but not valuing, doesn't that mean the tracking is just ego? And sometimes, honestly, yes, there is an ego dimension to this. But beneath the ego dimension, there is something more fundamental. Her internal calibration of where she stands is partly informed by how he regards her. When that regard withdraws, genuinely withdraws, not performatively, her calibration loses a reference point she was using without knowing it. So we now understand that she's tracking and that her tracking is calibrated to your regard for her, which means the moment that regard stops flowing toward her, something shifts in her that she can't immediately explain. Here it is. And when I tell you this, I want you to sit with it for a moment before you decide what to do with it. The thing that hurts her most when she doesn't value you is not your absence. It is not your anger. It is not watching you pursue someone else, though that can sting for other reasons. The thing that registers most deeply, the thing that produces a specific quiet disruption in her psychology, is the moment she realizes that her opinion of you has stopped being part of how you understand yourself. Let me unpack that carefully, because the layers matter. At some point in most dynamics like this one, the man is partly deriving his sense of identity from how she sees him. This happens naturally in relationships, and it's not a character flaw. It's a feature of emotional connection. Her perception of him functions as a kind of mirror. When she valued him, the mirror reflected something positive. When she stopped valuing him, the mirror shifted, and he felt that shift because he was still looking into it. Here's what most men don't realize. She knows you're still looking. Not because she's arrogant, but because the looking has a texture she can detect in the quality of your interactions, however infrequent they are. A slight over-explanation when you speak to her, a measured quality to your indifference that reveals it is measured, a particular kind of stillness that is performing calm rather than feeling it. And as long as she knows you're still looking, she knows she still has something. The mirror belongs to her. The moment that changes, the moment you genuinely stop needing her perception to anchor your self-concept, the mirror no longer belongs to her, and she feels that, not always as pain immediately, sometimes first as a kind of confusion, a reaching towards something that is no longer quite there, an awareness that the background signal she was using to track her own importance to you has changed frequency. Remember what I said at the very beginning of this video, that there was something you've been doing or stopping yourself from doing that affects her in a way you cannot see. This is it, not the behavior, the internal stance. The question of whether her seeing you clearly is something you still need from her. This cannot be faked. And this is the most important practical point I can give you. Men who try to manufacture this, who decide to act like they don't care about her impression of them while internally still very much caring, produce a version of this that she reads as game, as strategy, as the same seeking dressed in different clothes. And that reading either leaves her unmoved or, worse, slightly contemptuous, because she understands that the performance is for her benefit, which means she is still at the center of his attention, even in his attempt to remove her from it. Genuine internal reorganization looks different. It has a consistency across time and context that performance cannot sustain. It shows up not in what you stop doing, but in what you naturally redirect your energy toward. Men who reach this place don't seem like they're ignoring her. They seem like they are genuinely occupied, genuinely building, genuinely interested in something that has nothing to do with how she perceives them. That quality, that authentic redirection is what registers. Which is why the only version of this that actually works is also the one most worth doing, regardless of what she decides. Before you take this and turn it into a plan, there's something important to understand about how she's actually reading you. The version of this that produces the shift we've been talking about cannot be assembled from the outside in. You cannot reverse engineer the inner state from a list of behaviors. What women detect, and they are often better at this than men give them credit for, not through any mystical ability, but through the accumulated reading of emotional signals across years of social experience, is not the behavior. It is the orientation behind the behavior. When a man has genuinely reorganized his internal relationship to her opinion of him, the change shows up everywhere and nowhere. He doesn't announce it, he doesn't perform it, he simply stops organizing small decisions around what she'll think. He stops slightly softening his tone when she's nearby. He stops the internal calculation. Would this impress her? Would this explain away her concern? Would this make her see me differently? That stopping is what she notices, because it changes the texture of every interaction, however small. And here's the thing most worth knowing. The path to that internal place is not about her at all. It is about building a relationship with yourself that is stable enough that her calibration of you becomes genuinely irrelevant, not as a strategy, but as a natural outcome of where your energy is going. Men who do this because they are genuinely invested in something, genuinely working on something, genuinely living a life that interests them, those men don't need to try to stop caring about her opinion. They simply have less internal space for it. That is the version that works, and it is worth doing, for reasons that have nothing to do with her and everything to do with you. What I've walked you through today is a complete picture of a dynamic that most people only ever experience from inside it, confused about what's happening and why it hurts the way it does. You now understand the structure of what she's running when she undervalues you. You understand what she's receiving from your continued engagement on her terms. You understand why loss in her psychology is not primarily about your absence. It's about the withdrawal of your need for her regard. And most importantly, you understand why the thing that affects her most is not something you can construct. It is something you arrive at by genuinely redirecting your sense of self toward your own life, your own building, your own becoming. There is one principle underneath everything I've told you. Her opinion of you only has weight in your life to the degree you allow it to anchor your self-concept. The moment that anchor lifts, genuinely lifts, not strategically, the dynamic shifts. Not necessarily in the way you hope, and it shouldn't have to be, but it shifts in the direction of your own dignity. And that matters more than anything she decides to do next. You don't need to overanalyze every interaction looking for signs that this shift has occurred for her. That kind of monitoring defeats the entire point. What you do need to do is be honest with yourself about where you're still seeking her approval. Quietly, privately, in the internal conversations you have when no one is watching. I have a question for you, and I'd like you to answer it in the comments. What's one area of your life where you've been seeking her approval without fully realizing it? You don't have to share details, just the area. I read every one, and the answers people leave tend to be more honest than anything they'd say out loud. If this kind of content is useful to you, if this channel gives you something you haven't found explained this way before, subscribe. Because what I'm building here is a clear-eyed, honest account of how female psychology actually works, without the games or the formulas that turn real understanding into another performance. In the next video, I'm going to show you something that might flip your understanding of her distance completely, because the women who pull away the hardest are often the ones most emotionally attached. And once you can read that signal correctly, a lot of confusing behavior suddenly makes sense.